Today is a bit of a special day for me, personally, because it marks the day that I first started here at Wesley 20 years ago. It was June of 2005. It's June, by the way. Did it sneak up on anybody else? It's June of 2005 that I moved here right out of college to become the youth pastor here at Wesley. And I graduated from college, and within a day or two, I was in my car driving down all the way here. And I remember packing my silver Volkswagen Jetta with all my stuff packed to the brim and in one straight shot going all the way from Philadelphia here. And Wesley had set up a place for me to stay for a couple months. There was a church member family. They don't live in the community anymore, but the Ramirez, who had a house in the Island Club, and there were snowbirds, so the house was empty for the summer, and they were like, Lucas, this will be your lily pad, you kind of land, and then you can move on from there to the next place. Well, I got sick right as I was like trying to leave, so I'm packing up my car, I'm not feeling great, I'm coughing, and I'm in the car, and I got to do this whole 12, 13-hour drive by myself. And as I start driving, I'm calling Tim Steffen, was the pastor at the time, and I say, hey, Tim, I'm not feeling great. He said, well, I'm just going to help get you checked in, open the door. We did a sterile fist pump. Welcome to the community. I pulled the car into the garage, and he closed it behind me, and I was so tired after a road trip. And this may seem like TMI, but it's relevant to the story. I just went to sleep in just my underwear, okay? The next morning, I slept in and, feeling a little bit better, but I hadn't taken any of my stuff out of the car. Not in my toiletries, nothing. So I woke up and I said, well, I got to go to my car and get all my things. This was a house that the garage is adjoined to the house. One single door. You leave the garage, and once you go in, you're in the kitchen, okay? And so I go through the kitchen, I open the door to go into the garage, and that's when I made my first error. I closed the door behind me. Just in my underwear. That stinking door locked behind me, and then I realized it was locked when I was like, oh, I left my keys in the house. I'd also locked my car. Don't know. So there I was, trapped. I don't know why I'd locked my car. It was in the garage, the safety of the garage, but I was in my road trip tiredness. And so there I was, completely stuck. I can't get my clothes in my car, and I didn't want to break the glass in the window. This was homeowners. I'd never met them before. Surely I can't do that. Luckily, I'd remembered the night before, as I got there exhausted, there was a 8.5 by normal piece of paper with all the notes on the house on the kitchen counter. And I remember reading one line that said, "The neighbor across the street has a spare key." You see where this is going? So I thought, surely the new youth pastor at Wesley can't go get the key in only my underwear. I've got to find another solution. And so I start rummaging. This is a pretty large garage, and the homeowner was a bit of a mechanic. So and they had a stair, a second level. I'm like, surely somewhere in here is just a pair of shorts and a shirt shoved in a box somewhere. No. It took me about half an hour, and I eventually found a blue mechanic's jumpsuit. The only difference is that I'm 6'2", and the homeowner was about 5'8", 5'10", okay? So there I was, a big guy in a little jacket. I'm squeezing. This is my only hope. And so I finally get this thing on. It won't zipper all the way. I'm barefoot, no shoes. And I finally have the courage to mash the button, to epically open the garage. Dun, 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 dun. I'm forging into the brave new world. I go across the street. It gets worse. There's two little kids riding their scooters in the driveway, and here comes barefoot Lucas in a blue jumpsuit that doesn't fit him, and I go, hey, kids, are your parents home? To which they say no. And I have to sit there in shame on the stoop of their porch waiting about 15, 20 minutes to the parent. I finally got the key, and then Tim Steffen told on me my first Sunday, the whole congregation. He told that story. Listen, the last 20 years have been amazing. I was a youth pastor here for 5 years. Then I spent 13 years building and growing the gathering place. And all that while, me and Thea and the kids, we've been members here at Wesley. This has been our home church for 20 years. And it's so incredible to watch what God has done. But guess what? The best is yet to come. He is at work in this place, in our community. We are a key pivotal part of his broader plan and strategy to build his kingdom. It's not about building my kingdom, our kingdom. We are building his glory in the world. And it's so amazing because this church is made up of very influential people in various different sectors. And I believe that God is using us. We come here on Sunday mornings, we get built up in the locker room session, and we go out in all the different places that you are an influence. Go do it in the name of Christ. I think that the next 20 years have many, many more things to come, but hopefully no more stories like the one I just told you. One of that was enough. If you're just joining us today, we've been doing a series on sacred suppers, looking at how critical moments in the Bible narrative are often tied to meals, food. God feeds our physical bodies, but he also feeds our spiritual bodies, giving us nourishment. And last week, we looked at how meals are tied to the idea of covenant, that when God made a covenant with Abraham, there was a sacrifice of animals, an outward sign, and then a meal to celebrate it. The same thing happened with Moses. The same thing happened here just last night. The Copeland family married off their oldest daughter, Carrie. And as I officiated, I reminded them that this is a covenant service. Same thing. Covenant is laced with the sacrifice. In marriage, we sacrifice of ourselves. I'm dying to myself for you, my bride, my groom, vice versa. Then there's the outward sign of the ring. And then we went to Forbes Farm and had a dinner, a meal. Sacrifice, outward sign, and a meal. Meals are intensely connected to important themes of fellowship, koinonia, covenant, and today, perfectly aligned with communion. I just want to give us a few thoughts to frame what it is that's occurring on Sunday morning when we enact in the Lord's sacred supper. When we do this, this is much more than just ritualistic Christian activity. This is a special sacrament that the Lord instituted. So 4 really brief ideas before we come to this sacred supper. What is occurring in communion? Well, number one, and one that you may already know, it is a remembrance. Absolutely. Jesus said, when he instituted this, he said, do this in remembrance of me. You know that. It comes from Luke 22. And he took the bread, he gave thanks, he broke it, and he gave it to them, saying, this is my body given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. So we're not just remembering God's mighty acts through Jesus and the cross, we're also remembering his promises to continue doing mighty acts, the things that he will do. So we're recalling various things under this idea of remembering. There's sort of several subpoints. We're remembering Jesus' work on the cross, but we're also remembering that there's yet more to come. We're also remembering that we are people of the new covenant. If covenant is framed with a sacrifice, an outward sign, and a meal, well, today, Jesus followed the same pattern. He was the sacrifice. We have the outward sign of baptism, and then we have a meal, this sacred supper, and the promise of one final heavenly meal, the supper of the Lamb, which is to come. You see, food, spiritual nourishment, and nourishment for our bodies are so tightly connected to this gospel narrative. So we remember Christ's sacrifice, the future promises, and that I and you, we're part of the new covenant. The old covenant is put away, put aside. Now, number 2, not only are we, what is occurring here at this sacred supper, we're remembering, but there's also an evangelistic function to communion. Listen to what Paul said in 1 Corinthians chapter 11. Verse 26 says, for whenever you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes. We are proclaiming the Lord's death. There's an evangelistic function to what's occurring here. We're telling the rest of the world. We're not just telling myself internally in my mind and in my heart, remember the Lord's sacrifice. Remember the humility that the Lord took on. Remember his willingness to wash his disciples' feet, the Lord of the universe. Remember those things, yes, but also I'm telling the whole world. We're proclaiming that. And that, what Paul's saying there also really aligns well with Wesley's theology of the open table. In Wesleyan tradition, and in our tradition here, anyone that walks through that back door is welcome and invited to partake. Now, there's some reasoning behind that, and you should know that when he taught this in the 18th century, this was pretty radical thinking for him. Not everybody would have agreed with what he was saying. Let me read you his quote from one of his sermons. This is from his sermon titled, "The Duty of Constant Communion." Wesley said, "The Lord's Supper may be the very thing God uses to awaken and convert a soul." Let me read that again. Wesley said that the Lord's Supper may be the very thing God uses to awaken and to convert a soul. Now, this was grounded in the idea of prevenient grace. What does that mean? It just means that God's grace went on ahead of you. It was around the corner before you took the bend. God's grace was preparing you to receive his love before you ever even knew you needed his love. Before you even knew you had a thought like, wow, I really should get my life together. I'm not really making the greatest choices. I really need a helper, a rescuer, a savior. Before you even had those thoughts, God was already working to call you home, call you to the promised land in order to feed your soul, to nourish you, to provide for you. Before you even knew you had a need, he was preeminently ahead of you. He was the forerunner to your faith. So, because that's true, then Wesley believed that God's grace went on ahead of you before you even approach the table. You see, for some traditions, communion at this table requires certain methodical steps before you approach, sort of like we are unworthy to approach, therefore you need to confess your faith first, then you need to be baptized, and then you can have your first communion. So some traditions believe that to be the case. There are steps you ought to take before you come and dine with the Lord, in other words. But what Wesley's approach was different in the sense that he's saying God's grace has already gone ahead of you. This table is open to all. And in the act of partaking, it may be the very thing God uses to awaken and convert your soul. Do you see the difference? You know, the reason I also buy into this thinking and theology, not just because Paul was talking about the evangelistic nature of we're proclaiming God's gospel, or that Wesley talked about it, but when I look to the example of Jesus, he invited sinners to supper before they got their lives in order. Think of the story of Zacchaeus, the tax collector who was busy defrauding all his co-citizens. Zacchaeus had climbed up the tree to see Jesus, and he walks in and says, "Zacchaeus, come down from that tree. Let's go have dinner together." And in the activity of dining with Jesus, that's when Zacchaeus was overcome. And he said, wow, I really do need to get my life together. I need a rescuer. I need a savior. I have done wrong. I am repentant. I am converting. I am becoming awakened. It's the encounter with the Lord that awakened him. The fact that I've defrauded all these people. I will pay them back with interest. And then he changed 180 degrees. It was the act of engaging with Jesus over a meal. And Jesus regularly sat down with sinners. There was no prerequisites to the invitation. And in the dining together, a spiritual renewal and awakening was occurring. What's happening here at this sacred supper? we're remembering Jesus' sacrifice, remembering the values and the essence of who he was. We're remembering his future promises. We're proclaiming his life, death, and resurrection to the world. And we are also engaging in something deeper too. This is 3. There's a mysterious and transformational encounter that happens here. And I can't explain it to you, nor should I be able to, because it's mysterious. There is something about this sacrament that Jesus instituted. And interestingly, it's a joyous event. Even though we're recalling his death, we're also recalling his resurrection, that he has come to life, and therefore we too can come to life. And in the encounter, in the eating of physical elements, the fruit of the vine and the bread, there is a mystical, spiritual encounter as well. This is not just symbolic spiritual ritual. There is a real encounter with the living God that is occurring when we come and dine with Jesus. And it's mysterious and transformational, because anytime you engage in koinonia with God, you will change. Anytime you skirt up against the divinity and the power of who he is, it lifts, it resurrects, it brings hope, it brings healing, it challenges you, it convicts. So when we come here, this is a mysterious fellowship with God. I want you to consider this altar rail as the line and the threshold, the veil between heaven and earth. When you come here, you are coming to a piece of architecture, yeah. And the reason it's there is to separate. We don't do mundane activities up here. This is set apart for the worship of God. And yes, we're representing that God is here, but this is the meeting place of God. So it's a mysterious and transformational experience. And here's the 4th and last thing, and then we'll go to the table together. When we come to the Lord's Supper, we are adjoining ourselves to his death. Listen, we're adjoining ourselves to his sacrifice. I'll talk more about this next week. We're limited on time today. But the Jewish hope was for a new Moses. There is a prophetic word that was spoken that one day a new Moses would come that would be greater than the first Moses, one that would take us into a new Exodus. I'll tell you more about the beautiful parallels between Jesus and Moses next week. But when Jesus came and started leading his people towards the cross, he taught us that for us, we must also die to ourselves. And then Paul echoes those same words. To enter into the promised land with Christ, we must be willing to lay our very lives down. What did he say in Romans 12? Present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God. This is your spiritual act of worship. Moses was taking the people away from of Exodus to what? That they may go in the wilderness and worship. That's where we are now, guys. We're in the new Exodus, also in the wilderness, awaiting the final promised land, and we are to worship. And we worship him by adjoining our yes to his death on the cross. While studying for this series, I came across another cool reason why we have an altar rail, and I want to share that with you, and it's going to frame how we do communion today. Usually, we do communion by walking down the aisle, and the altar, the kneeling rail is always open if anybody wants to kneel and pray and come to the altar and meet with the Lord. But today, we're all going to kneel. Part of the beauty of this rail and the adjoining ourselves to Jesus' sacrifice is this. When we still did animal sacrifices years and years and years ago, the lamb was, the throat of the lamb was cut and the blood was spilled on the altar. Now, as we are invited by Paul to offer our bodies as living sacrifices, there's a really beautiful symbolism that comes in the altar. When we kneel and we arch our neck over that rail, it's as if we are putting our own neck on the line. It's as if we're saying, I am willing to die, O Lord. I want to die to self, and I'm adjoining myself with your sacrifice. When Paul says present your bodies, it's a plural, but he says as a living sacrifice, singular. Well, because there's just one sacrifice, the one of Christ, and that was sufficient for us all. It's multiple bodies, but we're all adjoining ourselves with his yes to suffer and to die, so that we may be living sacrifices for him. So in this moment, when we come and we kneel, we know that we're remembering his sacrifice, we're remembering his future promises, we're declaring his life, death, and resurrection to the world. This is a mystical and transformational encounter through which I'm putting my neck out and I'm saying, Lord, have my whole life, all of me, it's yours. And in that moment, in this thin veil between heaven and earth, God meets us here. So I want you to begin preparing yourself right now, even now, for an encounter with the Lord. As the elements of the bread and the fruit of the vine are put into your hands, you are encountering a special, sacred supper through which we are changed. I can't understand all the pieces of it, but God's Holy Spirit is here moving.